item number 1, which is Cresswells Farm, the long shoot.
Thank you, Chair. This is an outline application for residential development of up to 150 dwellings with public open space, landscaping, infrastructure and parking on land rear of 130 to 194 the long shoot. Access to the site is being considered at this time, but other matters of layout, scale, appearance and landscaping are to be considered at a later stage. The application has been previously considered and approved by Planning Committee in September last year. This was subject to the completion of a legal agreement that allowed further negotiation on 2 matters to be in the legal agreement: the dual cycle path and the NHS contributions. The key issues that are on the screen in front of you have all been previously considered on this site and are set out in detail on your agenda. As I've previously said, the only one of these matters that has changed since the application was reported is the planning obligation issue. The only 2 that have changed from this list of obligations is the dual cycle path and the NHS contributions, which you can see now are nil. Following the committee recommendation last year, negotiations continued with the developers, but it has been found that neither of the contributions are compliant with the regulations set out in the Community Infrastructure Levy, or SIL regulations, which requires that contributions must be necessary to make development acceptable in planning terms, directly related to the development, and fair and reasonably related in scale and kind to the development. The recommendation is therefore to grant planning permission subject to the same conditions and to a Section 106 agreement as before, but omitting the reference to the dual cycle path and the NHS contributions.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, councillors. The cycle route and the health centre are absolutely essential for this development. We started out several years ago with development in Weddington, which came to a public inquiry here when the inspector said we actually do need a new doctor's surgery in Weddington. The traffic impact studies, everything was based upon the fact that we actually would have an extra doctor's surgery in Weddington. And this doctor's surgery was partly going to be funded by the first developer providing the land for the doctor's surgery. So we have, as part of planning case law, we have got the argument that we need a doctor's surgery. Now we come to 5 more planning applications in Weddington and St Nicholas, and that doctor's surgery is still vital, if not more vital than ever before. And the developer doesn't want to pay £30,000 towards doctor's surgery. If we don't have a second doctor's surgery in Weddington and St Nicholas, the people of Weddington and St Nicholas will have to drive over the Leicester Road Bridge, like me and Michelle do, and use the doctor's surgeries in the Wenbrook town centre area. We do not have enough doctor's surgeries. We have 1, and it is located right in the middle of the air quality management zone. Absolutely appalling place to actually send even more patients to. The doctor's surgery cannot easily expand by 1.3 GPs as suggested, because that would involve filling every surgery up every hour of the day, and doctors don't work like that. The cycle route is also essential. As we're putting more and more development on the long shoot, we are going to have all these ghost islands. So what is currently 2 wide lanes is going to be 3 lanes, with the middle lane these right turning chevrons. That puts at great risk cyclists. So what is going to happen, and it's mentioned in condition 10, is right at the top of the long shoot, there's going to be a crossing, and the cyclists are going to be directed down the joint use footpath. The other 2 developments further down are funding the joint use footpath to go past the Bellway and the Davison's development. It is absolutely perverse if the Cresswells development doesn't have a cycle route in front of it. Yeah, it is clearly connected to expanding on the long shoot, putting more and more traffic down there and taking up more and more road space with right turn lanes, but we actually need to move the cyclists onto the pavement and have a proper dual use cycle. route. And if you add all these contributions they're trying to get out of, £100,000, about 60 odd for the cycleway, 30 odd for the doctors. These houses will sell for £30 million. £30 million of development, and they won't pay £30,000 for a doctor's surgery or £60,000 or £70,000 to have a cycle lane put in. It's appalling. We are getting absolutely nothing out of this development in Wellington St Nick's. We don't get the doctor's surgery, we don't get cycle lanes. They are shortchanging us. And if this development happens anywhere else, you would be expecting as local councils to get some facilities out of the developer. Thank you.
Thank you, Ken. Are there any points of clarification? No? Okay, the second speaker that is listed a late request is Councillor Tromans, and he's also listed to speak on item number 4. Councillor Tromans.
Thank you, Chair. I'm making observations and I have a general one, which is that it's concerning that some developers or land speculators, whatever the agencies are that are applying for the initial planning permission, are attempting to seek and treat our planning approvals as a free option. So they apply and agree Section 106 contributions now to get the applications through, and then seek to back out of paying the 106 monies at a later date when either planning infrastructure charging rules change or they're reinterpreted. In this specific case, I would respectfully suggest to the committee that they're not in a position to consider this particular change or this application tonight, and that they defer any discussion or decision on this development until we've had updated traffic information from county highways. You will have all noticed the numerous pneumatic hoses stretched across the roads in the area around the Longshoot. This is vital in recording up-to-date traffic information levels. It may be when this new data is put into the county highways model that the impact from the development will change from being significant, as it was originally assessed, to severe. And at that point, my understanding is it would trigger an objection. I would respectfully remind the committee also that other prospective developments on the Longshoot are already likely to attract highways objections on that basis. So clearly the issues are finely balanced in that area, and so it would be prudent for the committee to defer until the new county highways data is available. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Any points of clarification? Our next speaker is Alwyn Wayne. Mrs. Alwyn Wayne.
Mrs. Alwyn Wayne. Well, to begin with, the points I'm making here tonight are equally relevant to the Longshoot development and to the Galley Common development.
Sorry, just before you stop the clock. We're only discussing this item.
On the 4th of February, the Cabinet approved the decision to voluntarily increase Nuneaton and Bowdler's house building allocation to 9,900 homes to 2031. This revised allocation of 9,900 is recorded by the Council as requiring 495 houses to be built per annum, which means in order for the sums to add up, either that figure is deliberately misleading, it should be well over 600, or that the houses included in the developments being discussed here tonight are already part of that allocation. Now this is very important because of a very clear promise that was made by Councillor Lloyd at the Cabinet meeting on the 4th of February, and I quote, "We've got 9,900 that will be debated with the Working Party. Every house and every plan, or everything we do towards this borough plan, will go back to the public. You will have the decision and a right to comment and come back. It will come back to us and it will be investigated by the officers of this borough, and they will investigate every point that has been put towards us and before any decision is made to put a brick on the floor of this allocation." And he concludes, "In this borough, the people will make the decision." Well, if it is part of the 9,900 houses, then in line with that promise, not a brick should be laid until the full 9,900 has been debated with the Borough Plan Working Party as promised by Councillor Lloyd. If it is a part of that allocation, then you're seriously misleading the public with regard to the number of houses required in this borough between now and 2031. But either way, Councillor Lloyd promised, in this borough...
Mrs. Wade, this is a planning application.
Yeah, I know, in this borough...
Mrs. Wade, I'm just trying to advise you. This is a planning applications committee. None of the issues that you've raised are to do with the planning application in front of us. It's to do with total housing requirements, etc.
Well, can I just finish? I've got one more line.
If you could keep your comments in regard to the application in front of us, which is Cresswells found the lunch.
Okay. Well, in this borough, the people will make the decision. That was what Councillor Lloyd said. Well, I think the people have spoken very loud and clear, Mr. Lloyd. They do not want these developments.
Mrs. Wade,
now, will you honour that clear promise and let the people decide and reject those applications?
This isn't an opportunity for you to have a political rant
against
anybody.
It is a
No, you're finished. Sit down.
I will explain.
Can you turn your microphone off as well, please?
Can
you turn your microphone off as well, please? Are there any points of clarification to Mrs. Wade? Anything you need to come back on?
Yeah, just to clarify, the cycle path and the NHS contribution, I can go into detail as to why they are not compliant with SIL. It's not that the developer is trying to get out of it, it's just not compliant with the legislation. The cycle path does appear as a requirement in a cycle strategy that the County Council have got. However, the level of the contribution hasn't been costed out, the route hasn't been identified in detail, and so we therefore can't relate that in scale and kind to the development, which means it's not compliant with the SIL regulations. The costs that have been supplied for the cycle path relate to other cycle paths that have been constructed elsewhere in the borough. So whilst that's a good guide, it doesn't take into account, for example, the number of pavement crossings if there's any drop curbs that are necessary. So we can't, again, relate that in scale and kind to this particular development. In relation to the NHS contribution, the need for a doctor's surgery isn't disputed. However, the NHS don't have a strategy document to say how they're going to ask for contributions. And they don't set out exactly how the money is going to be spent. So again, we can't relate that contribution to be SIL compliant being directly related to this development, and that's why the contributions are not being required.
Okay, thanks for that, Claire. Neil, is there anything you want at this stage, or are you happy just to take questions during the... Okay, in that case, from the chair, can I move the recommendation as printed on the agenda? Does that receive a second?
Seconded.
Thank you. Any member wish to speak? Councillor Foster.
Thanks, Chair. I didn't hear that. I have questions actually for Neil Bennett, please. There is a recommendation that's been made this evening which makes a lot of sense. There have been a lot of changes in what highways have been looking at recently, and as you recall, in the last application there were some 797 additional pages of information, all of which I had read and went into minute detail on some of that stuff. Okay, that's not what we're here to talk about tonight, but the proposal that was made for a deferment makes a lot of sense to me, and I wondered if you could say if that is a possibility at all on the basis of what's happening to other developments.
Sure. As I understand it, the County Council are doing some further work to feed into their modelling, and that's not likely to be available for the next couple of months, and at the moment all they're doing is sort of origin and destination work, and then there's some further modelling work to be done after that. So if you were thinking about deferring it, in order for all that work to be done, it will be several months. And obviously the concern that officers would have with that is that there is a right of the applicant does have a right of appeal against non-determination.
Thank you. we are between a rock and a hard place here on this thing, especially in view of the earlier training session that we received on SIL and contributing licenses. Can I just ask a question on air quality, please? I know it isn't being particularly considered tonight, but I have previously, in the last cabinet and in the previous planning application meeting, brought up this issue, a very, very serious issue of diesel particulates, which is going to stop effectively turbo diesel engines being made in the future. Mayor of Paris, as you know, has already banned them from 2020, and Boris Johnson's going to do the same. We'll run into a lot of difficulties with this if we don't take some pre-planning action on it. I eventually talked to, like the leader of the council, did think that highways had some responsibility as highways in this area. It was only when I pushed them to the limit when they said it's nothing to do with them, they don't want to discuss it anymore. And in fact it is 100% local money and Bedford issue. I know this does the air quality management zone that we have on the Leicester Road Bridge isn't the worst one, I know that. It leads to more difficult problems over the bridge in other areas, so I know other councils are concerned about this. Speaking in some minute detail with our own environmental officer, who is also between a rock and a hard place, I think, because the legislation doesn't properly do this yet. And the inspector automatically would pass these planning developments. Could I ask you to comment on that, Catherine, please?
All I can say is that there was an air quality study done and submitted with the application. The environmental health officers were consulted and they had no comments to make on it. So they were happy with the investigation that had taken place and they were happy not to recommend any conditions or inclusions on it.
Okay, and I'll finish after this because the only thing that bothers me with this is that we, within Nuneaton, the same in a lot of the councils, are not measuring diesel particulates. They're measuring nitrogen dioxide, which is not at all relevant here. And if I quote the International Agenda for Research on Cancer, the IARC, and together with WHO, the World Health Organization, I'll just read the last bit. The smaller particles, which are the ones that come out of these turbo diesel engines in particular, for every increase of 10 micrograms per cubic metre, the lung cancer rate increases 36%. We have to start to look at this. That's what planning means. We have to look at that. I know we're not considering it tonight, Chair, but I wanted to use that as an opportunity to realise what we in the borough have to face.
Yeah, I mean, there are valid points about air quality, but I think the detail of it is for you to take to somewhere else rather than...
I will keep pushing.
Yes, thank you. Councillor Bond.
Thank you, Chair. Point of clarification, really. I think my colleague there answered my question slightly with SIL. I don't recognise SIL. I'm not sure what it means. I'm not sure what it's about. I'd like the officer to explain why the cycling path situation isn't SIL compliant, because it's a necessary part of our transport strategy. You know, we can't have gaps. We've got too many gaps already. You know, it just makes sense for me to have developers further down away from the town centre, putting cycle routes in, or you know, alongside the highway or on the highway. And then we get to it's gone. It just puzzles people, and it puzzles me.
Catherine actually did some training just before this meeting on SIL and what it is. In essence, the community infrastructure levy is a new set of regulations that, well, actually have been in place for a number of years, but now encompass how we ask for contributions for legal agreements as well as wider hierarchical and strategic contributions. So the community infrastructure levy will look at the wider things in terms of improvements to highways that are outside the scope of that particular development. But Section 106 legal obligations, which we normally ask for, relate to the impacts just for that particular site. Now, in order to be compliant with the SIL regulations, everything falls under the same umbrella, and they have to pass 3 tests. The 3 tests are that they have to be necessary to make an unacceptable development acceptable, they have to be related directly to the development, and they have to be fairly related in scale and kind to the development proposed. And as I explained, although there is probably a need for these things, there is not the documentation or the work done in the background to actually fulfil how those needs sit within that legislation. And because that hasn't been done, we are not in a position to require that that is paid.
Can I ask a supplementary, Chair? Who would prepare that document then? Who hasn't prepared it and they should have done?
It depends on whose responsibility it is. I would guess that a cycling strategy falls under the county council's responsibility, and the NHS contributions would be their responsibility.
It's not a case of not necessarily being done, it's something that's not that old, so it's a new piece of legislation that covers Section 106 agreements as well, so it's not necessarily a case of not being done. A lot of the information hasn't been available for them to draw up the strategies.
Can I just say to all members really, as well as we've had a lot of training recently in regards to SIL and 106s, various aspects of planning. But regardless of that, as an individual, please feel free at any time to contact the officers if you need to find out a bit more. It's really going to take up a lot of time in this meeting. We've got to go through all that we should have been asking before the meeting. Thank you. Councillor Phillips.
Yeah. Thank you very much, Chair. Can I take it that if these strategies had been in place, the developer would have been quite happy to pay the 88,000?
Not necessarily, it depends what the strategy said and how we could have fairly related that to the development.
Right. Are
I
we
think they were happy to pay a contribution.
They're happy to pay a contribution?
I think they were.
Right. Would it be possible to recommend that we are minded to move this recommendation on the basis of benefit in kind of 80,000 to be held in lieu of the dual cycle path and the NHS doctors, which we know we need? It isn't this council's fault that the NHS strategy isn't in place, or the dual pathways strategy, cycling pathways, is in place, and it isn't the developer's fault that it's not in place. Would we be able to ask the developer to come into a legal agreement with the council to hold the money, or the money be held towards future SIL costs?
I think if you wanted that, you would have to ask for the application to be deferred for us to go away, because it's not fair that we haven't been able, it's not fair on the applicant because we haven't been able to ask him the question. At the moment, the applicant has requested that we bring this to committee as it is now.
Right. Could I make a recommendation, Chair, for the amendment to the recommendation that we defer this and allow the officers to go back to talk to the developer about holding some money in lieu in light of strategies not being in place for community infrastructure level, which we feel as a planning committee is necessity. Thank you.
I'll second that, Chair.
Just before I take a vote on the amendment, whether we're going to do that, Councillor Long, will you put the amendments?
I'll waive it, Chair.
Chairman, I'm going to ask if anybody wants to speak on the amendment.
Chairman, I wanted to just ask the officers a question, if I could.
Yep, yes, no.
I'm
mean, I am reminded, that the officer reminded us at the outset, that this is an outline planning application. I assumed that this issue would, if the officers fail to reach a satisfactory agreement, it will be brought back to committee, or it may come back to committee anyway, because a lot of the detail is missing in what has been given to us here. I understand the need for the conditions, but the actual paperwork on the page I'm looking at, find it, reasons for approval, still includes a reference to the cycleway, and I don't see how we can approve this as written and still take it out of the 106 legal agreement. Now, that only mentions 106 and not SIL. So again, the recommendation as it's up on the screen there does exclude some elements that I've got some difficulty in taking into account when I'm making a vote on this decision.
Okay, that Claire will clarify.
The recommendation that refers to the cycleway actually refers to internal cycleways. They are proposing to do some cycle links within the site, but not to the main strategic one, which will run outside of the site along the long chute at a route which hasn't yet been determined. So that is a separate reference to cycleways.
Okay, now I'm bringing members in on the amendment about deferment. Councillor Lloyd.
I just want to point out, Chair.
Sorry.
Sorry. Not yet. Meeting ain't finished yet. The Chair, we better explain a little bit how SIL operates. SIL is not operating. It's not operating in its way it should be. People are referring to SIL, and SIL is referring to the borough plan and everything's being in. There's a grey area around it, so somebody better explain to people how SIL is operating, whether it's operating or whether we, because all we're doing at the moment, I'm doing it, but we're dealing with in the borough plan. So we better explain, because if you do, and you say it is, if I've learned something. On the amendment, I understand from the officers, from what we've just been told is, that the NHS have got nothing, they haven't put anything forward, and the side group, nobody's put, county or anybody's put anything forward, it's not big, they don't have money, nothing, whatever. And we've moved an amendment to get a lump sum of a contractor who will say to the officers, absolutely nothing to do with it. They don't have it, they're not going to put it in, and we're deferring an application for getting and coming exactly back to exactly where we started from now. We want them on that, but if these organisations ain't got any, all they're going to do is the chief and me, they'll say, sorry, we as contractors have come to do everything that you've done as a councillor to get on because they're not in structure, they're not in there, and it's not our responsibility. And we just send it back. Well, that's why, to me, it's okay, because it's not their responsibility, it's the NHS and the other people's responsibility. And we want the contractor to do it. Oh, best of luck.
Thank you. I mean, in regard to the SIL, I thought it had been explained to members. We've had training on it, we've had training prior to this meeting on it, and I'm hopeful that members understand the situation around SIL. Councillor London.
Councillor Lloyd just said some sort of bits that I wanted to say, but for me, I need to know what the consequences would be of deferment, how long we've got before the applicant can actually put in for non-determination. Because any negotiation that went on would have to be done within that timescale and got back to this committee. And I think Councillor Lloyd is absolutely right. At the moment, there's no grounds really to send it back on because it's already been determined that it don't have to pay for the cycleway or the NHS contribution. That grieves me. I was going to say that earlier, but that grieves me greatly, and we need to be looking, I think, in future applications that there is not a loophole there, that there's a escape route for that. So I think we need to be on guard for that. But as it stands at the moment, I can't vote for determination. Sorry for deferment. The choice is not. I don't know what the consequences are.
Yeah, it's a good question. I know some applications when we're approaching that time limit, it's printed on the agenda, but it's a useful question. Thank you.
They originally agreed to give us an extension of time until the application was considered, rather than a particular date. Because of this change in how the negotiation's gone, I anticipate that it hasn't yet been considered. They do have a right to appeal against non-determination, although they haven't said at this particular time that that's what they would like you to do. But I would urge you that if you are going to go for deferment, you actually give us and them a timescale which you want us to come back to you with that decision. And then it will be clear to the applicant then what that timescale is as well.
If Neil's agreed, we'll do it for the next meeting then, if we go for deferment.
I would agree with that.
Is there any member not already spoken that was Councillor Navarro?
Yeah, Chair, I'm finding this a difficult one really. I think we had a very clear explanation of 106 and SILS this afternoon training. And what is very clear for me is that we are, and I am the first one that I will admit that says every penny that the council can get out of applicants' applications we should. But we can't put something where there is nothing, and in terms of nothing, I'm talking about the sort of structure that relates to the NHS and the cycle part in terms of those protocols, to force a developer to wait until something else is put in place. I think that's rather unfair. You can't vote for that. I think what we have before us is quite clear, that we've deferred this application before, and we've said, let's go away, have a thought about it. They've done that. Now we ask for something else. How long is this piece of string? This is about time constraints. It's about people's financial input. It's about a whole host of things. And I think at this point in time, we have to go with what we have. It's recommended for approval, and I, for one, will not be voting on the amendment. I think it's not an apt amendment at this point.
Does any other member wish to speak on the amendment that's not already spoken? Councillor Bond, I'll bring you back in, but conscious of the time.
Yeah, just a quick one. I've got no idea about the NHS's strategies and planning, but I would have thought they would have planned for an expanding town. We've got problems with the GP surgeries, we've got problems with perhaps the hospital. I'm pretty certain, I'm 99% certain that the county council have got a cycling strategy. I'm 99% certain because I think I helped write it. I'd like the officer to come back and answer that one. We have got a cycling strategy, and why we haven't brought it into this planning application, I don't know.
It's not just a case of having a strategy, it has to actually have projects in it as well, which have to be costed out so that you can then fairly distribute them between the developments. And the NHS haven't got a strategy.
Yeah, point taken. Yeah, point taken. We've been trying to link Hinkley and Bosworth and Leicestershire with Nuneaton and Warwickshire for the past 15 years since the cycling facilities stopped at the
Thank you. You've made your point.
Yeah, thank you.
I'm not sure whether you should have declared an interest throughout the county's cycling strategy.
Well, I didn't write it, but I haven't it.
Okay, I'm going to take a vote on the amendment, which was to defer the further negotiations around the civil requirements in regard to health and cycle routes. Yeah?
Yeah.
Okay? And, sorry, and there were, you added on to it for it to come back to the next meeting.
With an answer.
Okay. Does everybody understand what they're voting on? All those in favour of the deferment? against? Okay, that becomes a substantive motion. Again, for that deferment to the next meeting. All those in favour of that?
Thank you.
And against? Okay, that item will be deferred and be considered at our next meeting.